and we're going to start. Excuse me. Thank you for joining. My name is Nicole Miller. I am co-chair of NewarkDIG. I also have a few other titles. I'm an advisory committee member for Sewage-Free Streets and Rivers and a steering committee member for Jersey Waterworks, as well as a member of the CSO committee, which are all three partners on this webinar. And I'm also a Newark environmental commissioner and a Newark resident and business owner. And so this is absolutely important to me as a resident, as a business owner, and as an advocate for water equality, water justice. I do want to thank the members of the NewarkDIG committee who helped to organize this event. Sheila Baker-Gujaral from NJDEP, Sabrina Ross from UVSO, Drew Curtis from ICC, as well as incredible support from Mo Kimberg with NJ Future, and our partners, Sewage-Free Streets and Rivers and Jersey Waterworks CSO committee. And so again, for those who are just joining, please introduce yourselves in the group chat. Tell us your name, your organization, and the town that you live in. And also, if you have questions that occur to you during the course of the webinar, please do put those in the chat. So while we're here, we're assuming that folks have a base knowledge of the combined sewer overflow long-term plan process that has been going on for 5 years. And this is absolutely an environmental justice issue. And so when we think about the world that we're living in right now, all the things that are happening, this is absolutely part of that. We hope that all of you take this seriously. We hope that you are thinking about the communities that are affected. You know, you think about Newark, where I live, Trenton, Camden, Paterson. These are communities that are already cumulatively affected by environmental damage. And so we want to make sure that we're providing healthy, safe water and waterways so that folks can recreate and live and have healthy drinking water and streets, healthy sewage-free streets at the very least. All right. And so just a little bit of housekeeping. We have changed the format of this from the original conception, and that is due, we'll talk a little bit later, to what we believe is a push now for a regional plan in the Passaic Valley Sewerage Commission region. And that unfortunately has not been a transparent process. They are now reviewing a plan that has not seen the light of day. And a regional plan that we will discuss from the DEER, the report from last year, produced a heavy burden on both Paterson and Newark, as well as Jersey City, has no GI requirement in that plan and has very little consideration for climate change. And so we want to take all those into consideration. But we will be reviewing the 9 sections of the CSO long-term control plan. That plan is known as the Selection and Implementation of Alternatives Report, SIRE, maybe? I don't know. I haven't gotten a confirmation on what we're calling it. I'm going to call it SIRE. We will be discussing public engagement, green infrastructure engineering, as well as jobs and financial capabilities. And so we want to make sure all of this is transparent as possible and that we use these next few months to engage the community. All right, so with that, I will let the committee introduce themselves. So Sheila?
Okay, so I'm Sheila Baker-Gujaral with the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissions, and I am also the co-chair of the Essex County Environmental Commission.
Hey everybody, and I'm Mo Kimberg. I'm with the Sewage-Free Streets and Rivers campaign. We're a campaign that is to empower community organizations to engage their members in shaping the solutions that will be adopted in the long-term control plans. So this issue is near and dear to us. We have an advisory committee. Nicole Miller, Drew Curtis, Kim Gaddy, Michelle Linga, and Shaniqua Biles are all advisory members, as well as Rosanna Da Silva is a technical advisor, and Chris Abrupta from Rutgers. So we're really glad that you all are able to be with us today on this call, Zoom, webinar workshop. And the other partner on this is Jersey Waterworks. So I'm going to pass it on to Pilar, who's going to introduce herself.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I am Pilar Paterson, and I am representing New Jersey Waterworks this morning. I also had worked for 28 years at the New Jersey DEP and was the lead of the team that developed the long-term control permit. So it is near and dear to my heart. For the last 4 years, I've been working in private consulting with Kleinfelder Engineering. I'm also co-chair of the CSO committee in New Jersey Waterworks. And New Jersey Waterworks is an organization that is working to transform New Jersey's infrastructure through sustainable, cost-effective solutions that provide communities with clean water and waterways, healthier, safer neighborhoods, local jobs, flood and climate resilience, and economic growth. And we've done many projects, and we're focusing quite closely on the long-term control plans. The last thing I want to add, I think most everyone is aware, but if you're not, the long-term control plans were originally due to the NJDEP July 1st or June 30th, and that due date has been extended until October 1st. So there is additional time yet for the long-term control plans. Thank you.
So we wanted to give everybody a chance to talk with each other. We have there's I think 50 people on the call right now. So as Nicole said, we're not able to do individual introductions with everybody, but we wanted to give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves in smaller groups. Okay. Did everyone hear me?
Yeah, you're going in and out. We hear you now.
Okay, so we want to allow everyone to introduce themselves in small groups. So we're going to do breakout groups. And then we also wanted you to answer 2 questions. What are you looking for in your town's long-term control plan? And it's okay if you don't know right now or you're still working that out. And what issues are important to you, within this context of stormwater and combined sewer overflows and flooding and everything that goes along with this very large infrastructure project that we're embarking on. So when Sheila is going to put everyone into small groups, and once you're in your group, please designate one person to be the note taker, so that then when we come back, we can report back, that person can report back to the larger group on your discussion. So just name, organization, what you're looking for in these long-term control plans and what issues are important, why this issue is important to you.
Okay, all right, so we'll go into our rooms now.
Mo, before you start,
Oh,
Mo,
okay.
can you remind us how much time that we have in the breakout groups?
Sure, you're gonna have 5 minutes. So we're hoping that's enough time. Sheila can check in, once we get closer to that, about 5 minutes.
Okay, here we go.
Not sure if that was enough time for everybody. I know it went quick for my group. But
Mo, we could have used another 2 minutes, but.
Well, we'll give those. We have some time now, so we can have a conversation about it. So folks who are able to take notes and listen to each other, who would like to start in terms of reporting back on what your group was able to discuss or did not get to? Sure, Rosanna.
No worries. So I had a great group of folks in my room. We really talked about, waterfront parks being, kept clean and safe for public use. So where we know we have CSO outfalls there, how do we ensure that the quality of water is safe for public use for recreational activities, the quality of life in the environment, the incorporation of green infrastructure, the reduction of the combined sewer overflow events, the social vulnerability and flood aspects of those areas, the education of waste prevention, and really being, a community-driven long-term control plan throughout is what we talked about. And feel free, anyone in my room, to speak up if I missed anything that you guys wanted to say.
No, Kim had her hand up too.
Sure. Kim Gaddy, I was in group 7. So are we going to wait for the other group? Was there any other responses, or should I just go? I was in a different group.
Go ahead. Yeah, different group. That's great.
All right, so I was in group 7. We talked about ensuring that the voices of the residents are heard in the plan, that the economic development is important, financial and social stability, water quality and greater access, and jobs as well was what resonated. There was one individual that was on the phone with an 848 number. She was not able, or he was not able to chime in. If you want to say something now, please go ahead. But it was mainly green infrastructure, local community input, economic development. Frank, Steve, Nicole, and myself was on the group.
Great. I think that's a good, also, if folks want to raise your hand to report back, that's helpful for me. We still have, I mean, it'd be great to hear from one person from each of the groups. So I'm not sure what group you were in, Rosanna, but so we've heard from 7, group number 7.
6.
You were in 6? Okay, so how about group number 1?
Hi, this is Lauren Belsky. I took some notes on group 1. We kept it more general, but we also talked about working with other cities and connecting with other cities to see how partners and other organizations we can work on long-term control plans.
Okay. Anyone want to add to group number 1? Okay. How about group number 2?
Hey y'all, this is Drew. I was in group number 2. We talked about, in the little bit of time we hit on a few kind of key issues, really wanting to solve community problems for homeowners and residents, etc., whether they're dealing with their home, the fact that they're environmental justice communities already, or traveling across town, etc., and just meeting some city priorities. And focusing on green infrastructure too.
And group number 3? Is there anyone from group number 3? All right, well, we'll skip that group for now. I was in group number 4, and we did get cut off a little bit early, but we had one person, Mike Witt, who's looking to more hear from everybody, which I think there's probably some folks on this call who are looking to kind of hear what the community is looking for in the long-term control plans. And then we also had Deb Italiano on the call, who's looking at green infrastructure and interested in whether the percentages that were put forward in the DEER reports are going to be the percentages that are going to remain in these long-term control plans once we have the selection of alternatives. Group number 5.
Hi Mo, I had group number 5. We did run out of time, and so whatever I missed from my group members, please jump in. But some of the things that we had talked about was that we were looking to have the long-term control plans should have green infrastructure, and how that can beautify the cities, and how we can use that in rain gardens and things of that nature to help beautify the cities. We're also interested in hearing more about what the proposed regional plan is going to look like. We're really interested in seeing it. And then also some of us wanted to really make the point that it's more than green infrastructure, and it's really important to look at all the parts of the plan and not get too lost just in the green infrastructure parts. And I apologize if I missed what anyone else in the group jump in.
I would just say, to add to that, community involvement is a really important aspect from the get-go, so that they can help build the solutions that work best for them.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. We're good, Mo.
I just wanted to see if there was any last, anything else anyone wanted to add that wasn't said in terms of, what you're looking for in your town's long-term control plan before we move on to the next part of this. And I did see, I just want to add, Betty Cruz put in, you guys probably see the chat, but looking for communities, working with the community to find solutions to environmental issues by implementing green infrastructure throughout the city. So I will move on to share screen. So we're getting into the meat of this, and Pilar is going to lead us through the, what is actually going to be in this long-term control plan. So kind of like the outline.
As soon as I unmuted myself, thank you. So I know many of us are very familiar with the 9 requirements of the long-term control plan, and some of us may not be familiar at all. And I'm just going to make a very brief run through of what is included in there, and I'd be happy to talk in depth about anything that the folks like as we go forward with it. So as you know, there's a long-term control plan that's required by the federal government of any community that has combined sewers. And in New Jersey, we have 26 permittees, 9 treatment plants, and 16 towns that have long-term control plans. So the first 3 boxes that you see checked, those are items that have already been completed. The permits were issued to these 26 entities in 2015, and they had milestones along the way. So the first milestone was the characterization, monitoring, and modeling. And basically what that meant is get to know your system. So there was a lot of engineering models that were done, a lot of characterization that was done. Everybody was required to map their source system to show where the combined parts were, where the separate parts were, because certainly you're not going to be able to clean your house if you don't know how many rooms you have. So that was the first step, and that's been completed, and everybody, as far as I understand from the DEP, did a great job. The second part was the permittees had to put together how the public would participate and how are they going to include public participation in the development of the long-term control plan. This was something new, generally not just New Jersey, but across the country. Generally, public participation meant that you held a hearing and you moved on. And so this was a very new initiative that New Jersey had to actually have public participation groups. And they worked hard on trying to have the most public participation that they can. I think this is probably going to be a process of some things that were done right and some things that were not, and lessons learned going forward. But this public participation process is ongoing and is part of the reason why we're here now. But the permittees did have to submit a plan to the DEP on how they intended to do that. The third thing that's already done is the consideration of sensitive areas. And a sensitive area means the towns were to have identified, this is a waterfront area where we would like to have more tourism or more residents being able to access the water. This is an area that people often use. And so it was just, here's an area, here's a neighborhood that's being impacted and it really needs attention. And so sensitive areas were intended to be those areas that got the first focus to be addressed. And again, those are the 3 things that are done. The 4th box, which is not checked, is actually half done. That's the development of the alternatives. And so the permittees had 7 different alternatives, and they could have had more. They were things like separate your sewers, build a bigger treatment plant, have green infrastructure, build tunnels. There was a whole bunch of stuff that was listed. And the permittees had to look at all of those 7 things and discuss what parts may or may not work for their town. And so that's done. That's the DEER plan. What is not finished is they have to tell us which one they actually chose. And that is what's going to be submitted in October. That's something that we'll want to be watching. Now the rest of these blocks, everything has to be submitted October 1st, everything that's here. The next thing is the cost performance considerations. And those are some engineering analyses that have to do with getting the biggest bang for the buck. So if you can spend $1 million and address 5 million gallons of CSO, that's better than spending $10 million and only addressing 2 million gallons of CSO. So they were to look at the alternatives and see which alternative was going to give you the most reduction in CSO with the least amount of money while doing everything else you're supposed to do as well. And so those were cost performance considerations. They are supposed to influence the alternatives that are chosen. Operational plans is merely where the permittee has to say how they're going to do O&M for these CSO structures. How are they going to keep it up over the years? If it's a rain garden, if it's a sewer system, regardless of what it is, you can't just build it and leave it. So the operational plans were intended to show that there's a long-term commitment to these alternatives and how they're going to be maintained. Maximization of treatment at the sewer plant. So there's 9 treatment plants. Every treatment plant had to go through a process to show how they can continue to take more flow without necessarily doing an expansion. And there was a lot of ways that that could be done, because every gallon of flow that the treatment plant can take is 1 gallon less that's going out untreated. And so often treatment plants have excess capacity, and so they had to do that process, and so that'll be in there as well. The schedule for the CSO controls, this is something, again, that's really important, and we're going to see this in October. This is the schedule of when the alternatives are going to be implemented. Is it going to be in 5 years? Is it going to be in 10 years, in 20 years? Is there going to be a phased approach? And here is where it kind of all comes together. Are the sensitive areas that were identified being looked at first and early? How is the user costs going to be maintained? And so the schedule of controls is proposed by the permittee, and that's something that the DEP is going to have to either accept or modify. And the last step is compliance monitoring. Compliance monitoring is something that's going to happen when all of the alternatives are all implemented. In some cases, that might be 20 years from now. And what compliance monitoring is, it means you go out into the waterway and you be sure that the water quality is being met. So in other words, all this work that you did it accomplish your goal? If the water quality is being met, goal is accomplished. If the water quality is not being met, the long-term control team has to come back to the drawing board and figure out how to meet water quality. So those are the 9 requirements for the long-term control plan. I'll move on unless there's any burning questions. All right, I'm just going to keep going in light of the time. So where do we focus? What's really important? Where can we make a difference? Because some things are already done, are already submitted. And so we have this extra time now between now and October, and then we get to see the plans in October when they're submitted. Where can we get the most bang for our buck as far as community involvement? So one thing is we want to take a look at what did they select. And my guess is there's going to be a number of selections, not just one. But are they putting a tunnel in my town? Are they proposing to expand the treatment plant in my town? How much green infrastructure is in my town? So take a real hard look at what was selected, and that's something that can be commented on. What's your timeline? Are they proposing 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Again, that's something that can be looked at. Is that a reasonable timeline? Should some of them be juggled? Are some of the plans paying attention to areas that are not the most important at this moment, which is, again, the sensitive areas? Cost considerations. So what are we looking at as far as user costs? And is that going to be overwhelming? Is it acceptable? Or can we actually do more? We can take a look at green infrastructure. Where is it and how much is it? And then finally, the additional community benefits. So these are things that I would encourage all of us to really focus on when the long-term control plans come out. Again, we're not going to change the engineering analyses that have been done over the last 5 years. Those things are set and done, but these are really, really critical areas. And these are things where our voice, I believe, can have an influence with the final form. So I'm going to conclude by just reminding everyone, the long-term control plan is submitted to the department. Then there's going to be this time frame where people can look at it and think about what they would like or not like. Nothing is going to be necessarily needs to be implemented until the department issues a new permit. The new permit will spell out what needs to get done. And so the time period between when these plans are submitted and when the department issues that new permit, that's a critical time period to provide input.
So we did have, Kim had her hand up. I think we have a few minutes. So Kim, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I need to take that down from the last time, sorry.
Okay. And so does anyone have a question before we move on to the next, where we're actually going to kind of dive into some of these alternatives that that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I was wondering if 9 requirements were applicable to the regional plan.
So did you get that, Pilar?
Right, are they applicable to the regional plan? So yes, every permittee has to do the 9 requirements, and it must be part of the regional plan as well. But there are some parts that don't apply to everybody, because if you're just a town and you don't have a treatment plant, you're not going to be looking into expansion of the treatment plant. If you're just the treatment plant and you don't have a town, you may not look into separation of sewers. But the regional plan, as each finger comes in, needs to address as a whole all of the 9 parts.
So could we explain, just a related question to that, because we were told, for example, because in many of these requirements happen at the local level, but we were explicitly sort of, and I'm forgetting Mo, who explained this to us very well. I think it was the gentleman from PVSA, but that green infrastructure is not included in the regional plan because it's considered a local solution. Yet it's being sort of pushed down from the state level. So how is it in the middle, you know, because from the bottom up at the local level, we're including that in our ordinances and we're doing all that we're doing at the local level, and it's being pushed down at the state level, but in the middle, it's not included in the regional plan. How does that happen?
Okay, so when I use the word regional plan, I'm probably using a different interpretation of what I mean by regional plan. But what you're saying is correct. When I think regional, I'm thinking, you know, cohesive as a whole. So if PVSC is only responsible for PVSC, they're not going to obviously necessarily have green infrastructure in their plan, but the towns would have green infrastructure in their plans. But when you put all of it together, because one treatment plant and 8 or 9 municipalities is one package. So green infrastructure will be addressed, but would PVSC necessarily address it? No. Would the communities address it? Yes.
Right, and here's something that came up at the last, you know, sewer-free New Jersey meeting, for example. When we're talking about funding, and this is an important piece of the equation, when we're talking about funding from the state and how that might serve some of our efforts. At the regional plan level, you know, when the state suggested that there may be funding associated for green infrastructure out of the RGGI pot of money. And if Chris is on the call, Chris Abrupta, I think that we had an exchange in our last call about this, how important that pot of money is going to be, right? So if RGGI money is associated with green infrastructure funding coming from the state, is not being allocated at the regional level, but gets allocated one by one piecemeal at the local level, it kind of loses a little momentum in the prioritization scheme of things. So there's some relevance here to keeping green infrastructure at the table at the regional scale also.
Well,
if it's not acknowledged, then it's not acknowledged, but it doesn't then also carry some weight when you pivot and look to state for funding support.
I think that's all agreed. That's one of the reasons that we're talking about the regional plan during this meeting, is because if regions, and I can personally speak to the PBSC region, are looking towards sort of, throwing away 4 years of community engaged planning to go to a regional plan, like a sort of capital letters regional plan, then we really do need to make sure that we're engaging with the municipalities and with the municipal authorities so that they do see green infrastructure as an important element of that. So that's a little bit of gray area. I think at the end of the meeting, we're announcing that an upcoming PBSC region supplemental team meetings happening on the 17th, and we do encourage everyone to tune into that. I think there's a lot of really important information that we don't want to be swept under the table. And so I do want to let Mo speak. I think Mo had a response to the RGGI point.
Well, actually, I just wanted to, I think we should table that. It's a great question, Deb, but I do want to kind of move on with this. And I do think that this next part doesn't address the funding issue, but it does talk about, what we really wanted to clarify, which is, what is the regional alternatives, what are the municipal alternatives, and what are like the sewer treatment plant alternatives. And we were initially going to have, we were hoping to have Newark's long-term control plan as an example that we would use on this workshop, but we weren't able to get our hands on that quite yet. So that's the reason we're going to have a part 2 to this. So we're still using, though, we're still using examples from the Passaic Valley Sewerage Commission, but you could say these are, analogous to other regional plans. So I know folks on the call from Camden and other areas. So, this is an example, and then hopefully it's applicable to your region as well. And so we just wanted to make these kind of like separate buckets, because we've really focused heavily on the municipal alternatives and what municipalities have been considering as the Sewage-Free Streets and Rivers campaign, and even in like the public meetings that I know have been held in Jersey City and Newark, and possibly other places as well. We've really focused on what do community members want in terms of these municipal alternatives, which Nicole's going to go into more detail on, and what are the community benefits associated with the municipal alternatives. So it feels like there has been somewhat of a conversation there. But what we haven't looked at is what the sewer treatment plant is considering. So for Passaic Valley Sewerage Commission, they're looking at expansion of the sewer treatment plant, and essentially to do secondary treatment bypass, which would allow them to accept more flow. So they're trying to get to, I believe, 720 million gallons daily, which would be I think the amount needed to reach the goal for reducing combined sewer overflows in the region. And so they're doing that by expanding the sewer treatment plant and adding this new procedure, which allows them to accept more flow. But there hasn't been a lot of conversation around what are the community benefits associated with this, how is it going to impact Newark, so we just wanted to highlight that this is something that's, most likely, it hasn't been selected yet. We don't know what the decision is. This is we only have right now the information that was submitted from the July 2019 report. So this is what was put in the July 2019 report. So that's what we have right now. We do not know if this is the final selection of what they're going to do. It seems possible, but we want folks to know that this is what the sewer treatment plant is considering. And then Nicole, do you want to just go through the municipal, or I could skip to the regional?
Mo,
No,
can I
I'm fine.
interrupt?
Sure.
This is Marcus Ely calling from PVSC.
Oh, thank you.
I just want to confirm that regarding the plant expansion, it's not an expansion of the footprint of the plant. It's an additional pipe within the current plant, which will allow flow to be bypassed around the secondary treatment process and directed to the effluent pumping station for disinfection and then pumping out to the outfall. All excess flow would receive primary treatment and disinfection, and all effluent would meet secondary effluent standards. So PVSC would still comply with all terms of its permit. This option is something that that PVSC will do. It's not a if. It is a option or an alternative that PVSC has committed to do. It's going to be it's in our permit that was just revised, that PVSC will implement this secondary bypass. So this is something that can be counted on for PVSC to do. The benefit to the region is that it's basically proportional to the flow. The more flow that PVSC receives, the lower the amount of CSO volume that is produced by the entire PVSC district. So the specific flow breakdown per municipality is something that you have to run the model to find out how that, I guess, that saved flow is divvied up. But that, since the plant is receiving the flow, it benefits the entire region by approximately up to 320 million gallons of additional wet weather flow. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Marcus. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the municipal alternatives, which is that center column in Mo's slide. And so what you have to think about this is sort of like your club sandwich, right? And so the Passaic Valley Sewage Commission is responsible for its footprint, for its campus. And Marcus just described this, one of the main elements that is going to be helping that plant to receive more flow to get to that 720. The municipal alternatives are what each of the 21 communities have been working towards during this 5-year process, and they had to review these alternatives. And so starting with regulator modification, that is basically in the pipe, sort of like allowing more or less water to come through during a rain event. Green infrastructure, I hope everyone is aware that green infrastructure is nature-based engineered solutions that help slow down or store water during rain events and then release it slowly into the ground or back to the water treatment facility. This helps to reduce the amount of water that is in the system during a rain event and therefore prevents overflow at the sewage treatment facility. So I&I is inflow and infiltration. Basically, that's stopping your leaky pipes. So if you have a pipe that is letting groundwater come through, or water from a lake or a stream come into the system, then during a rain event, that's just helping to overburden the system. Water conservation is a public engagement campaign to help people know to conserve water during rain events especially, but in general, as well as hopefully, ideally, would also be social programs to help people pay for low flow toilets, shower heads, et cetera, and to know the importance of having those and that they're not at all less than, they're just a better option for the environment. Satellite disinfection is end of the pipe treatment of the water before it goes out into the river or the stream or the waterway. And that, the one that is being considered in Newark at least, is peracetic acid. And that would be somehow, put in so that the water is held and treated for a little while before it's discharged out into either the Passaic or the Elizabeth River. And then we have sewer separation, which is turning the section of the town, whichever section is considered, instead of it being a combined sewer system, a CSO section, it was a CSS, it would then be an MS4, which is the majority of the sewer systems, which is a municipal separated sewer system. And that's probably one of the most costly. And I skipped storage. That wasn't on accident. Yeah, I'm sorry. So storage can be above or below ground storage. Those are all gray infrastructure solutions except for GI and water conservation. And so none of these by themselves reach either the 85% capture or the 4 or less CSO events per year. And so all of them, I repeat, all of them to be financially accessible, they all require some combination of efforts. And so the municipalities are considering a 20 to 30-year timetable to get these done. But this is the time in which they are formulating which of the alternatives they want to pursue. And so in the Newark plan, for example, which we were not allowed to have, we have they have considered the regulator modification to get some small, relatively low-cost benefits, green infrastructure, storage, inflow and infiltration, water conservation, and satellite disinfection were all being considered. And so, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess depends on your perspective, PBSC, which Newark is part of, is now taking, I think, a strong look at a regional alternative that has not been shared with the community. No, are we talking about that? We're talking about that. Pilar?
Yeah, I'll talk about the regional. So, yeah, so this is where, I mean, it gets interesting. Like I said, we've really focused on these municipal alternatives, and similar to what Passaic Valley is doing with the sewer treatment plant in terms of the secondary treatment bypass in that pipe, that's an alternative that's going to benefit or, you know, allow more flow from all of the municipalities in that region, the 8 CSO municipalities. So the regional alternatives that are also being explored are alternatives that would, you know, allow more flow from multiple cities. So, you know, they're looking at regional tunnels and storage tanks. The Newark regulator modifications, I guess, will also benefit because it's going through Newark. All this additional flow will then is considered a regional alternative. The Hudson County Force Main, it gets additional pipes, the parallel interceptor, and a Jersey City pipe. But I'm going to show you guys some images from the DEER. And I just wanted
to, because the words don't do justice.
So just so folks know, this is, you know, if regional tunnels were selected, these are the regional tunnels that were proposed. Again, this is the 2019 report. This is what was proposed in the 2019 report if they were going to do regional tunnels. So we just want to make sure everyone has a chance to kind of digest this. This has not been selected. This is what was proposed as an option. So this is what tunnels would look like. Tunnels would be able to meet the goals of the CSO long-term control plans for, you know, reducing the amount of overflows all the way to 0. Or, you know, depending on the size of the tunnels, you know, it would be, you know, 0, 4 overflows, you know, all the way to 85% capture. So that's, the tunnels allow for that many different kinds of options based on the size. And then the other,
I'm sorry, Mo, can you go back to that one? So just so everyone is clear, the tunnel that's being proposed is that red line. And so the blue line is the PBSC sort of like service area, the district that PBSC handles, but that red line up by Patterson and then down going the entire length of Newark and then through 3 different towns are the 3 tunnels proposed in this particular alternative, regional alternative. But there's more.
And these were kind of like the top 3 from the DEER report. So the other was this combination of the little dots or the regulator modifications. The yellow line is the parallel interceptors. And these are kind of like an additional pipe that would be put in. And then this Jersey City pipe here.
Yes, and parallel interceptor is precisely what it sounds like. The interceptor connects all of the other lines that come from the city. And so putting in a parallel interceptor would be sort of a mirror line along that line to help capture more flow. Again, solely this regional plan is mostly happening in Newark and Harrison.
And then a third option was actually a combination of the two. So it could be, and what was interesting about that, I guess the one where without tunnels would only reach 85% capture. So that option of just without the tunnels does not get you to 0 overflows a year or 4 overflows a year. It only can go to the 85% capture based on the modeling. So I think that's why there's this combination then where you could get more captured if you had the tunnels and those additional alternatives. So these are what regionally could be, we're not sure what's going to be selected, but this is what was presented from the DEER report. Is there any questions on these before? We just want to make sure everyone's aware. Well, we're hoping to find out soon what these alternatives are, but are there any questions on these or any comments from anyone on the phone who may have more information on these alternatives?
We see Dr. Chris Abrupta from Rutgers has commented, wow, these regional solutions look really expensive, and it seems Newark will be the main city that is inconvenienced during construction. Yes, it's a great observation, Chris.
Hey, Chris. Hey, Nicole.
And also, there's no green infrastructure included in this regional plan. Now, the municipalities still have the option to do some demonstration projects, green infrastructure, but it's not green infrastructure dedicated to solving the CSO problem. I'm sorry, Frank?
Yeah, if I could sort of address Chris's comments. So the goal of the regional solution and alternative is that the communities come together and propose an alternative that benefits everyone. So while every community has costs associated with their LTCP and their plan that they ultimately select, going with a regional solution will only work if every community involved in the regional solution sees a savings over going it themselves. So that's the real goal of the regional solution, is that there's a way that everybody could save some money over their solution going themselves. Otherwise, nobody would go into the regional solution if going on their own is cheaper. So that's one of the reasons why they're still looking at it. All the communities have to get together. They've got to not only agree to go with the regional solution, is agree on how to divvy it up, and divvy it up in a way that everyone is going to save money, whether going it alone. Finally, let me just talk a little bit about green infrastructure. One thing that's been made clear to the communities is that no plan is probably going to be approvable without some sort of green infrastructure. So even if communities do go for a regional solution, they're also going to be doing things on their own that are going to benefit the LTCP and benefit the community, like green infrastructure. So if a community approves and goes with a regional solution, it's going to save them money over their cost as if they had gone it on their own. That might give them a little bit more funding to do more green infrastructure than they would have normally done on their own. And of course, they're going to do things like conservation, which doesn't sound like it would help for CSO, but in fact it does, because the less water you're putting in to the system leaves you a little bit more space for stormwater to get to the treatment plant.
Thank you, Frank. Frank is with Lord Jesus, I just like I totally think that.
HDR.
With HDR, I'm so sorry.
That's
I was
okay.
trying to think about what I was going to say. Frank with HDR, he's been, I'm sure he introduced himself, he's been working with Newark for quite some time, and he's very familiar with our system. And just to that point, I think it's very important that, especially in a COVID reality, that cities are looking to save money where they can. We also, at the same time, want to make sure that people understand that this is talking decades worth of infrastructure spending that's being considered, and we want to make sure that cities are getting the most benefit for the dollars that they're putting into it. And so considering that a regional plan might be the most cost effective, sort of in a bare bones conceptualization, we would like to see that plan so that we can evaluate it and really know if all of the true benefits and costs are being considered. We have evidence that shows that very often folks who are very great infrastructure minded are not looking at the full holistic benefits of green infrastructure, and also the other additional benefits that come with some of the other solutions, including reduced street flooding, including reduced basement flooding, the general benefits of water conservation that you've already mentioned can't go understated. And so it's not a disdain necessarily for regional alternatives. We just want to make sure that the regional alternative is truly the best benefit for the dollars that are being spent, not just a basic, penny pitching kind of dollar saving, but are we really spending the money the best way? And to do that, we really would need to see the plan that's being considered.
Yeah, and I just add to that, and I think this kind of leads into the next presentation, is that if we're able to solve the issue based on the permit using a regional alternative, does that take the pressure off of the municipalities to do everything that they can themselves in terms of reducing flooding and stormwater issues and combined sewer overflows, and using green infrastructure or other alternatives to do that? So there may be some things that we haven't explored yet, and that in terms of ways to really reduce the CSOs on the municipal level. And so our next speaker is Michelle Adams, and she's going to talk about something that really hasn't been also discussed too much, which is private property opportunities. So I'm going to hand it over.
Just 1 second before Michelle comes on, I saw a question from Chris. He did ask how many years will it take to design the regional tunnels and how many more years will it take to build it? I am not particular about the timeline on that. Frank might be able to add in, but I did mention that the municipalities have a 20 to 30 year implementation and completion timeline. And so we're talking, 3 decades on the outset, at least.
Yeah, exactly, Nicole. And you're right. There is a 20 plus years, depending on the community's financial capabilities. The more financially stressed communities might request a 30-year implementation schedule to spread that cost over it. And when we say cost, it's not like not the city of Newark. It's the cost for the city of Newark, but it's the ratepayers, the people who pay water bills in the city of Newark, who get that cost as well. I haven't seen the schedule for the regional tunnel, the parallel interceptors, but usually it's a year or 2 for design, and then 2 or 3 years for construction. They might do that early on in the program, and then there's monitoring after that. And then for green infrastructure, that's something that you're gonna spread out over the 20 years of it, and maybe you start with areas in your downtown that would benefit most from it and visible, and you do those in the first 5 years, and then you see how those are working out, and you adjust the program as it goes along, and you learn from what's been built and what's been done. And the LTCPs are things that can change. There's language in there that a new technology comes along that could replace some other method that you're using, and you're allowed to revisit that. So
thank you, Frank. And we're running a little behind, so I do want to just move on to Michelle, if that's okay.
no
Thanks,
problem.
Mo. Can you hear me? Everybody can hear me? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So hello, everybody. I am speaking from the Philadelphia area, and am sharing an example of what Philly did. So their plan went into effect in 2011. So it's been in place in about 9 years now. They call it Green City Clean Waters. There are a number of gray infrastructure components, but one thing Philly did as a municipality was they adopted a green infrastructure stormwater ordinance that impacts private property. And that's really important because so much of the land and the impervious is private property that the municipalities don't control. So right now in New Jersey, if you own, say, a parking lot and you want to take up that parking lot and build a new parking lot or whatever, you're not required to do very much stormwater management because that is grandfathered. It's exempt from regulations because it was built earlier. Philadelphia changed that. They said if you're private property and you are redeveloping, developing, building something, you must capture the first 1.5 inches from all your impervious surfaces, whether it was a parking lot before and you are building a new parking lot or whatever. And they gave lots of incentives associated with this for green infrastructure. So things like green roofs, porous paving, planting trees, all of these things are or are exempt from the requirements. So say you build a new building and it has a green roof that meets a city standard, then that's considered managed. It's considered meeting the permit. This affects private property, commercial development, public properties such as schools, institutions, universities. It's also been partnered with public right-of-way projects where water from the right-of-way might go on to, say, a schoolyard that becomes green. And it's really very cost effective because when you're building something new is the most cost effective time to implement green infrastructure. It's much more cost effective than retrofits. In the first round of these first 9 years of Philly's program, green infrastructure has allowed them to meet most of the permit requirements that they've met. So that they need to do the gray infrastructure, they're working on it, but the green infrastructure so far has met almost 80% of what's been managed. So it has not stopped development or redevelopment. It hasn't slowed things down. So building this into the ordinance is really powerful. Now is a good time in New Jersey because the separate storm sewer areas in New Jersey, DEP just passed new regulations in March for New Jersey, so advocating and requiring green infrastructure for the separate storm areas. So this is now a good time for municipalities to be updating their stormwater ordinances and requiring private property to manage their stormwater differently with green infrastructure. It's more equitable and it does not apply to residential single-family homes, 15,000 square feet. Those properties pay a single flat fee. And Philly has talked about how it's more equitable for the commercial properties because say you owned a parking lot, you weren't paying any water sewer bill at all. Now you're paying your stormwater bill as opposed to say a small footprint condominium that paid an outsized bill. And now their stormwater bill has gone down because it's represented by their footprint. So quick overview as an example of what's been done in Philly.
So do we have any questions about this before I?
You did. Sorry, nothing in the chat. I muted myself. The garbage truck was making noise. Feel free to raise your hand or leave a question in the chat. We are monitoring the chat for anything that's been discussed, and we will come back to it. I think the Philly examples are really great. I hope everyone is really paying attention. Most of the plans, at least up in the PVSC region, have been focused on municipal actions, like what can be done on public land, right-of-ways, et cetera, and city-owned lots. And so really engaging your legislature, whatever that looks like, about engaging the private property owners. We're talking your warehouses, your parking lots, your schools, churches and institutions, about changing some of those impervious surfaces to more pervious surfaces, or GI capture technologies, is going to be, I think, an important part of making sure that we reduce the overall cost that the municipalities have to spend.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. If I could just add that it has not stopped developers. Once they know what the rules are, it just becomes part of the project. It has making it a requirement has not slowed down development or redevelopment.
Okay, and so our next speaker actually is going to, I think this is tied together, because one of the issues is, you know, the financing of these plans. And so how do we make sure that these plans are going to be affordable and equitable for our communities? So Larry Levine has done a great deal of work on this issue with the Jersey Waterworks Asset and Finance Committee. And he's going to present on the equity and affordability in financing these long-term control plans.
Great, thanks, Mo. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm on my third audio device of the morning, was having some issues on an earlier call. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about how affordability issues tie directly into a core element of these long-term control plans, and how the permittees can take steps to essentially make their efforts more affordable for low-income customers, even while maintaining or increasing a high level of investment overall, by shifting their rate structures, or by taking other steps that are aimed at reducing costs for low-income customers specifically. So go ahead to the next slide. Oh, do I have ability to advance it? Oh, there we go. Okay, thanks. So this is a slide that's from some work done by Dan Van Abs at Rutgers. Apologize for the background noise. Done by Dan Van Abs at Rutgers for Jersey Waterworks. He, along with New Jersey Future. Oh, and I seem to have lost my internet connection. I'm on the phone. You guys can still hear me?
Yep. We can still hear you. No, we can't.
Done by Dan Van Abs along with New Jersey Future, and what they did is gather water and sewer rates from almost every utility across the state, which is hundreds of them, and overlaid that with income data, and looked at what the cost of water and sewer service would be for a certain amount of usage that's meant to represent basic indoor water needs, and compared that cost in each municipality or each utility service area to the income distribution in that area. And this map reflects the percentage of income that a sewer bill would represent in different parts of the state. It's hard to read the legend here, but the color coding here represents the share of the households in that, I think it's by net census tract, who pay more than 2% of their household income on sewer service if they were using this minimum amount of usage. And if you advance to the next slide, you can see a close-up of where there are hotspots, if you will, in the Newark area, as you might expect. It's a function of both what the sewer rate is and of what the poverty rate is, what the income distribution is in an area. Okay, advance to the next slide, please. Okay, so here are the things that I want to highlight that I'd encourage folks to be thinking about. The LTCPs include something called a financial capability assessment. And the reason that utilities do this is to analyze what the cost impacts to ratepayers would be of a certain level of investment that they're proposing. And to essentially to argue to the state and federal regulators, based on those impacts, we don't think we can spend too much too fast, or else things will become unaffordable for our ratepayers. And that's an allowable consideration under the law. What that actually means can mean a lot of different things. And what it typically has meant is they're looking at the cost of a typical bill relative to median household income in the utilities service area. That doesn't tell you a lot about how rate increases are going to affect those who are least able to pay, who are below the median. And that's an important consideration. If we don't want to be making these investments and having the burden fall on people who can't afford to pay them. But we also need to be making these investments. And we don't want the permittees saying, well, we can't make these investments because it's going to hurt the poorest people in our community. We need to have a way that both provides clean water for those who need it, and which is everyone, and is affordable for everyone. So the two main things I want to focus on. The first here is the rate structure, right? So the total cost of investment is a function. The cost to a ratepayer is a function of the total cost that the utility is investing, and also what the rate structure is, how those costs get allocated to different individual customers and classes of customers. Right. So and a rate structure, like a tax structure, can be progressive or flat or regressive. And it's not necessarily done that way intentionally with respect to the financial and economic consequences, but that's the effect that different rate structures have. So a few principles here. So lower income customers tend to use less water, generally speaking. People who don't have a big lawn to water are going to use less, right? People who are living in multifamily housing in an apartment are going to tend to use less, right? And so given that, where you've got a rate structure that relies heavily on fixed charges rather than metered charges, or you've got one that relies on metered charges but actually charges less for additional increments of water, which is the case in some places, those are going to tend to disadvantage lower income users who tend to use less water. So a fundamental issue here is, what is the rate structure with respect to those types of things? Is it flat? Is it based on fixed charges? Is it based on metered? How is that metered charge structured? So shifting a rate structure away from a flat charge, which many sewer utilities actually do. They have a charge per residential hookup rather than charging based on usage. Right? Shifting away from that, shifting towards a usage-based charge. Having usage-based charges that are progressive, where there's an increment, there's a higher per gallon charge as the incremental usage moves up, right? Sometimes called tiered rates, sometimes called inclining block rates. Those sorts of things will enable a utility to raise the same amount of revenue, but with less impact on lower income customers. Okay, next slide. Here's a big one, very relevant to stormwater, to sewage overflows, right? And all of these are relevant to CSOs. But this one has the benefit of also incentivizing green infrastructure, right? A stormwater utility fee. As many of you know, the state recently authorized local governments to establish stormwater utilities that charge fees based on impervious area. And if you shift your rate structure to charging and collecting funds for the wastewater system, not just based on water usage or wastewater impacts, wastewater usage, right? If you shift to charge for the stormwater portion of what the wastewater system is handling, charge for that based on impervious area, you're again going to tend to shift things to the advantage of lower income customers. Again, think about the development patterns, say a big box retail store that has a big rooftop and a big parking lot. They're not paying much right now for sewer service relative to the contribution they have to to the sewer system if they're being charged based on how much water they use. And conversely, if you've got someone living in an apartment, their impervious footprint, their contribution of runoff to the sewer system is relatively low, but in proportion to that, they're paying a lot because they use a lot of water. They've got people living and flushing toilets and showering and bathing and so forth. And so if you shift and have the revenue generation approach for paying for CSO investments, shift that to being based on impervious area, shift that to a stormwater fee, it's going to tend to be a more equitable approach. It's going to make things more affordable to those least able to pay. Okay, next slide. Oh, can we go back one? I think there was one more in between there, although I'll be very quick on. Yeah, so this last one is thinking about cost allocation between different classes of customers. So utilities often have to make a choice of how much of their total revenue needs they're going to generate or assign in the rate structure to residential versus non-residential customers. And sometimes you end up with residential essentially subsidizing non-residential. And so that's something that utilities ought to look at as well. That's a practice that's certainly not going to help affordability for residential customers, right? So these are all just basic issues about rate structure, and the problem is that utilities are not, wastewater utilities, CSO permittees, typically are not thinking about these things when they assess what the cost impacts their ratepayers are going to be of investing in CSO controls. They're typically analyzing those costs in regard to what their existing rate structure is, instead of thinking about alternatives that could change the way that the cost burdens fall upon low-income customers. Okay, next slide. And so this is the other, besides rate structure, this is sort of the other category of things, is focusing on specifically on low-income customers, ways that utilities can in a focused way, typically in a means-tested way, right, provides relief to those customers. Right? You could say two categories here. One is short-term assistance, things that if someone's in a financial crisis or temporarily falls behind on a bill, a utility can give them flexible payment terms, give them a one-time forgiveness of arrears if they've got some financial crisis, can give them an extended repayment plan, right? Things of that nature. Those are really short-term solutions. The other category here on the last bullet in red, things that provide ongoing reductions in bills. Right, so just a discount based on income. A percent of income payment plan is something that exists in some places some states on the energy side for electric and gas utilities. It's not as common on the water side, but becoming something that's been adopted in a couple places like Philadelphia and Baltimore, where you would cap the monthly charge at a percentage of the customer's income for customers below a certain percentage of the poverty line. Right? A lifeline rate would be for a basic minimum level of usage, a low charge that is meant to be affordable for the vast majority of people, if not for everyone. And you'd have to supplement that with other approaches if it's not affordable for everyone. Right? So again, this is sort of all under the heading sometimes called customer assistance programs. It could be called affordability programs, low-income affordability programs more broadly. And that's also something that the utilities typically are not considering as an option when they're considering how to pay and what the cost implications are for their customers. Right, so last slide, I think, is the next one. Okay, so that's tying it back together, the implications for reviewing these long-term control plans. So you want to look at the financial capability assessment. Right? I know the PDSC is doing one that's part of what their consultants are doing on behalf of each of the individual permittees in their area. And they're probably going to focus on the median household income. They're probably going to focus only on what their existing rate structure is and how bills would be impacted by allocating the charges according to the current rate structure. And if that's the case, we should be pushing them to do differently, right? Analyze alternatives, not just for how to control CSOs, but also for how to pay for it, right? Other bullets here are, I think, pretty self-explanatory. Public participation, there's not been, much to my understanding, much engagement in the public participation process around these questions, right? Third point here, public acceptance of implementation costs. This is something, a frame that the permittees are very concerned with, right? And part of their thinking on that, we should be encouraging part of their thinking on that should be what the implications are for those least able to pay in particular. And then last, and I saw, I think Chris and others in the comments, pointing to this, obviously, there's money beyond what the utilities have, particularly for those that serve predominantly low-income populations, money beyond what the utilities can generate from their ratepayers that's going to be needed to really make the investments at the level that are needed to protect clean water, right? And so there are state level and federal level solutions as well to that, which I didn't note here, but a few things. So first, legislation to authorize low-income discounts. So this does pertain to what the utilities can do themselves, but pertains to making sure that they have authorization to do it. The law is unclear about whether many categories of utilities are allowed to give discounts based on income. There's a bill that almost passed last year in the legislature that should be able to pass to authorize that clearly. Another approach, state funds for a statewide low-income affordability program similar to what exists for gas and electric customers, right? And I can't see, part of my screen is obscured on the bottom. I can't tell if there's a last bullet there, but the last one that I would add, if it's not there, is infrastructure funds, obviously directly to, yeah, have it there, increase state funding for water and sewer infrastructure. That's going to supplement what's able to be generated from the ratepayers, get help to where it needs to go to communities that, as a community, are least able to afford the investments.
Right. Thank you so much, Larry. That was a great, swift run through. Again, any questions that you have, please put them in the chat. This is heavy stuff. And again, we're talking, potentially 30 years, billions of dollars worth of infrastructure spending. The money has to be found somewhere, and so we have to make sure that it's found equitably. How about that? And just looking over some of the conversation, feel free to review it yourself in the chat with some highlights. I think going back, there's a conversation about funds from the federal government. Michael Witt mentioned that any regional plan would have to be contingent on a cost-sharing agreement between the municipalities. Just because particular infrastructure would be located in the municipality does not mean that only that municipality would pay for it, all would contribute, which is, I think, a great idea in theory. As far as the actual funds, it doesn't really address the disruption, which is, I think, Rosanna's comment that followed it. Besides being economically feasible and addressing regulatory goals, how are we addressing the burden placed on our underserved communities, especially when implementation of these regional plans, up to possibly 30 years, will impact the quality of life of residents daily? Dr. Chris Abrupta mentioned that, he said, I doubt any of this is going to be affordable. We need a Federal Infrastructure Act, FIA, that provides $10 billion to New Jersey to eliminate CSOs. You can read the rest of it in the chat. Frank says he agrees that FCA, I think FIA for Newark, the FCA, the Financial Capabilities Assessment for Newark shows that it will be a burden to the community. And again, as Larry pointed out, which cannot be understated, that is under existing rate structures. So that does not include the a possible stormwater utility fee or alternative rate structures that Larry mentioned. And so I think to that point, Mo, we have a poll.
Sheila is gonna, yeah, we want to give everybody a little, stretch your arms. Let's, you've been sitting for a long time, so let's go a little wiggly, but, and get ready to participate. in a poll so we can all answer some questions and be engaged a little bit. And
okay, so I'll launch the first question. There we go.
So the poll's on your screen now. Okay. This is anonymous, so feel free to be honest. Do you understand how stormwater utilities can be used to pay for sewer upgrades? Okay. So we're at about 80% and our answers are slowing down. Most everyone understands, which is great. That means that Larry was successful in his presentation. For those 4 folks who said that they are not, they don't understand, please contact us directly. We want to make sure that everyone understands, especially our community advocates who are then going to be going out and sharing this with the community. You can privately message me in the chat with your information, and we will get back to you, unless it was Chris who was doing it sarcastically. So I guess, Sheila, we can go to the next question. Do you think a stormwater utility is an equitable financing method? Oh, one person came out the gate quick with a no. Probably because they own a parking lot and they don't want to have to pay for the impervious surface that they have. All right, we have, I think, 76% of people voted. We have a 66-34% split. Yes, the yeses are at 19 and the no's are at 10. Oh, the yeses are at 20. So 8 people thinking about it. All right, so the polling is slowed down. We're at 21 yes and 11 no for is a stormwater utility an equitable financing method. Sheila, we can go to the next one. Do you want your town to consider a stormwater utility to help pay for sewer upgrades? You should have had an open-ended question for all the no's, like, how would you like sewer upgrades to be paid for? I guess go ahead and put that on the chat. It will remove your anonymity, but we like the honesty in the poll. So we're at 83%. We have 25 yes and 6 no.
I want it, but I don't want to pay for it.
I mean, you're gonna have to pay for it. The CSOs have to be paid for, right? And so the beauty, I think, of the stormwater utility is that it helps flatten that payment. Instead of just people who currently have toilets and sinks are the ones solely paying for sewer upgrades, everyone who has impervious surface pays for their portion. And also, carrot stick, ideally, it will include incentives for private property owners to install green infrastructure, which would then remove some of the burden of the impervious surface that they're accountable for, ideally. And so right now we're at 86%. We have 25 yes. They want their town to consider a stormwater utility, and 6 no. Sheila, I think we have one more. And I think you can choose more than one for this one. I'm not certain. Who do you think is the best person in your municipality to discuss the long-term control plan with? Like, you know, that who's the authority here? It's like watching a horse race. Who's gonna win? So voting is slowing down. We're at 83%, 30 people have voted. And it looks like the town council and the water and sewer director are in the lead here, with the water sewer director being out front at 69%, town council being 59%, depending on how your town is structured. That's very important to consider, because the water sewer directors, along with their consultants, have been the ones in the lead for the last 5 years during the development. But ultimately, the decision makers are either the council people or the mayors. And so we want to make sure that they are well informed about all of the particulars about this. And it's also intriguing that 13%, 4 out of 32, put I don't know. And that's a very honest answer when we are going out talking to people in the community. Where am I going to get the answers? How am I going to share, if you're with an advocacy group, how am I going to share the best information about my community and what my community is considering? And how do I have access to some of those people who are decision makers or who are putting the work in on this? I think now we're going to be moving on to answer some of those community engagement questions with Drew, right?
Yep.
I have the agenda in front of me. I'm just remembering.
So yes, Drew Curtis is going to lead a short brainstorm around community outreach, given that we now have a little bit more time before these long-term control plans are due in October. So I will hand it off to Drew.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I think it still is morning time. Thanks for everyone's attention to these issues. I recognize that we're in some very trying times and folks are holding a lot right now. So just appreciate y'all and take the time you need. So this has been a really great presentation so far, hitting on a lot of key issues that have come up in community meetings that we've really tried to prioritize in Newark thus far. Like affordability is a huge thing for folks, as is green infrastructure is huge. Addressing some of the issues like flooding is huge too. And so we've had a lot of great community engagement in Newark thus far, and I hope everyone is having some good community engagement in your municipalities. But that was a different world ago. As you see in the picture where we had folks around a school cafeteria, you really could, we can't do that anymore. We can't have a bunch of folks all together in one room. So we have to find new ways of doing things and engaging the community too, because these last couple of months are critical in actually finalizing the plan, taking what the community says and making sure that it's integrated 100% in the final plans that Pilar went over too, like what those plans are going to contain. But we want to make sure those plans are rooted in community voices. So I'd love to spend the next couple of minutes talking about this and like brainstorming what we can do to ensure we get the word out to folks too. These Zoom meetings are great, but we do know that there's a real digital divide in our communities, particularly environmental justice communities, which is where the bulk of these plans take place. We saw this, I know I saw this in school in the Ironbound neighborhood too, there were a lot of kids who didn't have access or don't have access to computers, or videos, so they're not able to do the homework too. But the same holds true for their parents too, in this remote time. So given that we know there are gaps in the digital divide, and then also that we can't meet in large groups, what ideas do folks have on other ways of doing outreach to make sure that we're getting out to folks? Love to get some other voices in here.
Drew?
Yes, go ahead.
I know we established in the Upper Clinton Hill section of the city of Newark, where I reside, we create a COVID-19 action team, and we put together at least 14 to 16 blocks, and we have different leaders on each block, and we pass out, we disseminate flyers and resources, and then we created a care box on 10 of those blocks where individuals could come and access information. And then we went back to old school telephone tree. So I think that these are some things that we just have to think about. And I know with the GI reformers, we're kind of looking at that ways of how to better engage and inform individuals, but we're just going back to what we used to do. And of course, we're using Google Hangouts and Zoom as well. And some seniors are definitely jumping in, and some of the older homeowners. So that's one of the ways that's helping us, at least up here in the Clinton Hill section.
That's great. I love the idea of like using block captains out there too, because that can kind of help replicate your actions. Because there is a lot of information that needs to be disseminated too. Like this stuff isn't like the easiest to understand if you're just looking at something, but as you talk through it, then it becomes more understandable too. So if we can somehow get our block captains trained up, I think that can be a great way to do it.
I've also seen
someone in the chat. Oh, sorry. Someone in the chat mentioned is public access TV a possibility or council meetings broadcast. That was Frank, not someone. And I know that the Newark Newark council meetings are broadcast. The question is, who's watching the public access channels, right? And so maybe that's an opportunity to engage the public airways and get some main channel streams. So I think that's a point about maybe engaging the media around it. And I'm going to go back on mute because somebody's messaging.
And Mo, you had a comment too. Thank you, Nicole.
Just on the council presentation, I know in Paterson their council meeting was on Zoom, and then it was on YouTube, so you could watch it after the fact. So they had a presentation on their CSO long-term control plan that was part of their council meeting, and then it could be shared after the fact because it was a YouTube video.
Great. So for all of that, whether it's public access or YouTube, etc., that's great for getting information out, but how do we flip that and get the feedback back too? That's really important, I think, too. Because it's not just about the education and getting information out, but like the community survey, that's a great point too, Kim. I think maybe the block captains can help with that. That's a great idea. Thank you, Kim. Any other ideas? I mean, you don't have to have them now. You can reach out to me. If you have stuff, reach out to Mo, Kim, any of us, Sheila, etc. The door knocking, exactly, literature drop off. I think that fits in with that like door-to-door block captain approach too, and like leaving surveys that then they can go back and pick up. But yeah, let's keep the conversation going in the chat. I'll drop my email in the chat. You can always email me or reach out to me. But yeah, I guess we can move on to Kimberly, who's going to talk briefly about workforce development opportunities.
Also, can I just add that Frank mentioned that places of worship for literature drop-off would be good. I think we were in the middle of a private chat, so he sent it to me, but it probably should have gone to everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Sorry about that. Yeah, I thought that it would be a good idea to just at houses of worship, just to have literature available there. As people pick out their flyers, that they can have that as well.
So yes, I'm going to hand it over to Kim, who's going to talk a little bit about the workforce opportunities.
Hi everyone, my name is Kimberly Irby. I'm a policy analyst with New Jersey Future. I've been providing some support to the Jersey Waterworks CSO subcommittee, and yeah, I'm going to talk about water workforce. So given that these projects represent the investment of billions of dollars, how do we make sure that this money goes beyond solving stormwater issues and actually goes back into the community? So one way is to consider the water workforce opportunities that will arise and try to connect those with local hiring and the local economy. So there are three main opportunities that we anticipate, one being construction of both gray and green, another being maintenance, again, of both gray and green, and then thirdly, utilities, for example, just utility staff in general. It can encompass a wide variety of jobs in that case. So next slide. Gray infrastructure projects do tend to be completed by out-of-state contractors, so perhaps we could focus our attention on green infrastructure projects that not only can involve hiring local contractors, but also present the opportunity to hire residents in the communities where the projects are installed. So for green infrastructure, it's been shown that economic activity related to those types of projects will drive spending and support indirect and induced jobs in other sectors like retail and manufacturing. And based on some studies in other states, it's estimated that GI programs will support between 11 and 13 total jobs per $1 million spent. These include direct, indirect, and induced. And this compares to just 7 jobs supported by traditional water and wastewater programs. So when we're thinking about these GI investments, we should plan them alongside local workforce development efforts. And an example I want to bring up specific to GI is Camden's Power Corps program. The program trains about 30 residents ages 18 to 26 every 6 months in GI maintenance, primarily working on the CCMUA sites in Camden. And the program members receive counseling and professional support while they're doing this so that they're holistically prepared for next steps, whether it leads to actual GI work or not. So there's this program, there's another one in Newark as well that helps residents earn a GI certification, and these types of programs together can serve as kind of the bridge between residents and these upcoming opportunities. So I'm currently in the process of writing a case study for Camden, and I think Drew's working on a Newark one, and both of these will be ultimately posted on the Jersey Waterworks website if you want to look into those in the future. So lastly, as if GI investments are coordinated with local workforce development efforts and if permittees prioritize local hiring programs, then these investments have the potential to greatly benefit the local economy and thus the local community. So when you're reviewing LTCPs, you should look to see if there is anything on local hiring. And if not, you can then start asking questions about water workforce and training programs now in the period before they're finalized.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Mo, I know that you're muted still, but this is an important consideration, especially when we talk about costs and benefits, rather than looking at just sort of like the dollar-to-dollar comparison. What are the additional benefits? We didn't even go into the glories of green infrastructure and the water conservation outreach, and then all of the downsides that come along with some great infrastructure and solutions, because that's not really the point of why we're here. But we do encourage all of our advocates to go and look at the resources that we have available and to ask questions and to really to dive into these plans to really suss out what the true costs and benefits are about the alternatives that are being selected.
So I think we're running short on time. We were going to have an additional breakout session, but we are at 11:55. So I think we're going to skip this portion and go just to recognize everybody's time. We've been on here for a while. So I think we're going to skip it, Nicole, if that's all right, to the kind of closing.
Yeah.
Oh.
Can we go back to the question? And feel free to chime in the chat. Based on what we just discussed, what issues would you focus on when you review your town's long-term control plans? And what questions do you have now? Hopefully you have a little bit more understanding about what's going into them and what considerations we need to have when reviewing them. And so just thinking about it before you see your plans, your town's plan, what issues would you focus on and what questions do you have? And so feel free to put those in the chat, share them with us privately. We'll be turning this around. We are recording it, and I think now we'll talk about our resources. Next steps, yeah.
Do you want me to, I'll do the next steps, I guess. So just so you all know, I mean, this is kind of, great timing, but the PVSC Regional Supplemental CSO Team meeting is actually coming up on Wednesday, June 17th. We are expecting to hear about the selection of alternatives at that meeting. So the information that we did not have today, we hope to have on June 17th, or at least a clearer idea of the direction that plan is going into. And I would also suggest for the other regional, the CCMUA and Elizabeth and Perth Amboy, for those areas as well, if you do not have a supplemental team meeting scheduled, to reach out to your permittee in your municipality and ask them to schedule one of these meetings. We do know that North Hudson Sewage Authority submitted their long-term control plan on June 1st. So that one is actually, it's not up on the DEP's website yet, but it will be. So if you're in Hoboken, Union City, West New York, Weehawken, that plan has been submitted. Or if you're just curious and you want to see what a long-term control plan looks like, that plan should be up on the DEP website, and we will definitely post information about that. We're also going to have a part 2 of this workshop because we do want to go through Newark's plan as an example, and also, submit comments. Before the long-term control plans are submitted to DEP, there is an opportunity to, talk about affordability, to talk about, green infrastructure, talk about community benefits with your permittee, with your municipality before these plans are actually submitted. So we're going to have a part 2. We hope you all join us so we can go through, a long-term control plan and work on comments together so that we can make sure that, we're communicating, what our towns, our communities, our residents want to see in these long-term control plans. So tentatively August 18th, most likely virtually.
Yes. And so that concludes, boom, right on time. I'm loving it. So 2 minutes to spare. Thank you to all of our speakers, Michelle Adams, Pilar Paterson, Drew Curtis, Kim Irby, Mo Kimberg, and myself, speaking on behalf of the committee that has put this together. We do encourage you to join us at our part 2 happening in August. I think she said the date. I don't remember it. I'm sorry. But then also connect with us through any of these groups. So NewarkDIG at NewarkDIG.org, and Sewage-Free Streets and Rivers at SewageFreeNJ.org, and Jersey Waterworks at JerseyWaterworks.org. These are all groups that are working on the CSO issue and other stormwater-related issues and other water equity issues as well. And so we do hope that you will connect with each other in the chat. We had more than 50 people join on this chat, and we do hope that you will stay connected and follow us. We also have Flood Defense NJ as a resource. And if you go to the Sewage-Free Streets and Rivers website, we have a toolkit for community advocates to help them with their outreach. And I know that the GI reformers with NewarkDIG are doing incredible outreach work. So please contact myself, Kim Gaddy, who is our coordinator, or Drew Curtis to talk about what's going on in Newark with regard to our interventions with the city on this matter. Thank you very much. I don't know if anyone from the committee wants to say anything else, but enjoy the rest of your day.
I just want to thank everybody for participating, and please reach out to us. I don't think we added any. I guess Nicole, we will send out a follow-up email with information if you want to reach out with emails if you have additional questions. So yeah, just thank you all for being on this call, and please reach out if you have additional questions, concerns, or want to talk about this further.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Really good.
Oh, don't end the meeting, Mo. I need to capture the chat. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I got the chat, Nicole.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, sweet.